Parents calling it quits, giving up their kids. It's called relief of custody.
I know at the moment it's never an easy decision for the parents to get to this point where they have to consider giving up the rights to their child.
It's a huge problem right here in our backyard.
Relief of custody is shrouded in hopelessness.
Hundreds of cases filed in just the past 5 years.
We need to figure it out. The children deserve it, our families deserve it. In the western part of the state, we have about 20% of the population, but we have probably close to 50% of the relief of custody petitions filed.
It happens to every kind of family.
Teens have probably the worst outcomes in foster care. Teens with severe behavioral or mental health concerns or challenges have even worse outcomes.
In the next 30 minutes, you'll hear from the people who see it every day. From judges to people working with families and social workers. Everyone trying to make it better and keep families together. We're going to jump right into the discussion. We have Judge Lee Chitwood from the Pulaski County Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court and Renee Brown, President and CEO of DePaul Community Resources. Thanks so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We are seeing, unfortunately, more families turning to relief of custody. Judge, why do you think that is in Pulaski County?
Well, I went back and looked at my numbers from 21 through 24. We had 8 petitions. The reasons were varied. I think I only had one parent who came in and asked to be relieved of custody. So it's different reasons, but it's primarily custodians of children who are not their parents who get to a point where they simply say, I can't do it anymore because of delinquent behavior or other behavior, and sort of throw up their hands and come in and say, I can't do it anymore. We get very few petitions from biological parents, in my experience.
So this would be grandparents or aunts and uncles that maybe took custody of the children to prevent them from going into foster care.
Yes, or they might have just been mom and dad couldn't handle it. Grandparents come in, get custody. The child turns 13, 14, starts acting out perhaps delinquent behavior, sexualized behavior, and grandparents, aunt and uncles are just not prepared to deal with it. And difficult dealing with any teenager, but a teenager with problem behavior is especially difficult.
Renee, what can you say about this? Why are we seeing so many families turning to this?
I think that, like the judge said, there's a variety of reasons, but when you have families that are dealing with housing issues or lack of transportation, just having difficulty meeting basic needs, and then you pile on top of that a child that might have some behaviors. And then they're out-resourced, right? So it's hard for a parent who has to work 2 and 3 jobs to then be asked to do an intensive counseling program with their child. They don't have the energy, they don't have the time, right? And it's really difficult. So I think we're seeing problems on top of problems in our area. And when you don't have some of the resources, like when you get outside of Roanoke City, you don't have a lot of public transportation. When you get far southwest, you don't have a lot of resources for counseling support. You know, everybody's struggling with meeting basic needs and job stability and housing stability. You put all of that together and our families are really stressed and they are struggling. And so when families are struggling, sometimes they turn to another family member. So so maybe the parents are having difficulties with the child, so the grandparents step in, or aunt and uncle step in and try to help and take care of the child.
And Judge, you're saying that some of these parents are showing up at the courthouse expecting to just drop their kid and leave?
Yes, ma'am. We had a parent who filed a petition to be relieved of custody. We set it for a pretrial conference. She actually brought this 6 or 7-year-old girl to the courthouse anticipating that she was just going to drop her off and that was going to be the end of it. So it was a pretty tragic and pretty horrific circumstance. I ended up denying her petition when we eventually set it for hearing, but that child came into foster care eventually anyway. But it was just this expectation that you could just leave your child with the court system or with a DSS and just walk away. It was pretty frightening.
Yeah. Oof. Renee, what are you hearing when it comes to this?
Yeah, I agree. Families, once they get to that stage, they are in crisis mode. They have no hope for things to be different. They feel like the only option for their child to be safe or their family to be safe is for somebody else to take care of the child. They feel like they're at wit's end. I cannot imagine, as a parent, right, feeling so hopeless that I'm bringing my child to a building and hoping somebody else will help me take care of them. So we need to figure out ways to support our families before they're in crisis. And obviously foster care is a safety net, and it's an important one that we have, but we want to make sure that we're supporting families and keeping kids in their communities and with their families whenever possible.
And the outcomes for these kids can be pretty terrible, unfortunately. Talk to me about that.
Right, so the outcomes for children who have to enter foster care through a relief of custody or for any reason tend to be pretty bad. We see, as adults, high rates of homelessness, incarceration. These children who have been through trauma and then are then traumatized again by losing their parents. And then, you know, in the foster care system, they're with fantastic people, but they're not their family. Sometimes they lose their whole community, their school, their church, their sports teams. They lose all of that. And that's hard to imagine how you cope with that. And then as you become an adult, if you don't have permanency, you know, we all struggle as young adults and have those moments where we need somebody to help us. And if you don't have that, then you're much more likely to just make some bad decisions and end up with worse consequences than children that are able to stay in their homes.
And I know you've said foster care is not the fix-all.
Right.
It's better to keep families together. So
Sure.
what is the step here that we could do?
Yeah, in my mind, I think we need adequate and flexible funding so that we can go to families and say, before they're in crisis and bringing their child to the judge, is say, what do you need? You're having issues, you're having problems, and we need to be flexible with it. So, for instance, if a family has a medical crisis or their car breaks down and they can't fix their car, and then they can't go to work, and then they lose their job, and so then it just piles on. So if we can go to families ahead of time and say, what's going on here? How can we help you? What do you need? Rather than saying we have these 3 programs, none of them really fit what you need, but these are the 3 we have to choose from. So if we could be flexible and start early and just help families to prevent small problems from becoming big problems.
Okay, real quick, because we got to wrap up this segment. You both were part of a work group that is trying to take the steps to hopefully move Virginia forward, because this is a nationwide crisis that we're seeing. What was the outcome from this work group? Small steps, big steps, somewhere in between?
Small steps. We had a couple meetings, very productive meetings, representatives from all agencies, several judges. They proposed legislation. It looks like that legislation has been approved by both houses. It looks like it's going to go to the governor. But they're good steps, but they're small. Going to require that these cases get referred to FAPT, and they're going to require social history from the Department of Social Services. But the work is going to continue with that. But good small steps, I think.
Okay. We have to wrap up the segment with you, but don't go anywhere. This is causing, of course, as you can imagine, a big burden on you as taxpayers. We'll talk about that next. Roanoke County reports about 20% of the kids in foster care right now are relief of custody cases. For Roanoke City, it's about 15%. These are high numbers. Grace McCowan from Roanoke County and Gwen Coleman from Roanoke City are here to talk about what this means. And Grace, Roanoke County is paying about $12 million a year in CSA money. That's what you oversee. It's the Children's Services Act money. They're paying for everything from private day school for some of these families to community-based services like therapy and everything in between. So this puts a huge stress on Roanoke County.
It does. It puts a strain on our finances. It puts a strain on our resources as a whole. The ability of our foster care teams to support these youth is strained by the very difficult cases that relief of custody are. Financially, it is a big strain. Most of the youth who enter foster care through relief of custody end up in a congregate care placement rather than a home-based placement. And those placements are just by nature much more expensive and tend to go on much longer. So that does put a strain on the finances of the state and local funds. And it makes it difficult to put our finances where we'd like to, which is in more prevention work, more community-based services, those not only have a higher rate of return for us for state money, state dollars to draw down, but they're more effective. They do a better job of keeping families together.
And prevention is something that you guys have been doing somewhat recently, the prevention model. Tell me how that's working in Roanoke County.
It's really exciting for us. It's a small but mighty team at our department. They work very hard to keep youth out of foster care. They, I think, would hope that they had not only more resources, but more time. A lot of the times when we become aware of these children and families, it is at that crisis point where there's very little that we can sort of convince a family to try because they feel like they're just at the end. When we do have a little more time and a little bit more ability to implement some resources and strategies, we have seen some success. They have not only been able to keep youth out of foster care, which is always the goal, but they have also been able, when that is not successful, to transition those youth into foster care in a way that is less traumatic and less expensive, because they're able to match those youth ahead of time with foster families, so those children have a better chance of being able to be placed in a home-based setting and not in a congregate care setting.
And the prevention model, you say, is working about half the time?
About half the time, which, you know, we would love to see those numbers increase, and I think they will over time as our efforts become stronger and more known to the community. I think we are doing a great job of getting buy-in from community partners. Other child-serving agencies are wanting to collaborate with us on this effort. I think they're becoming aware that foster care is not always the answer. I think, you know, if you work in another child serving agency and you see a youth and family struggling, you might think foster care is the solution. And I think our other agency partners are seeing that we don't have great outcomes in foster care all the time, and that if we put more resources, time, energy into preventing that, we have better outcomes.
Obviously, if the child is unsafe, abuse, neglect, then foster care is potentially the answer.
Yes, and we have some cases even that have started as relief of custody that have ended in abuse, neglect, and coming into foster care. But in general, these cases are very different. They are about the intense level of behavioral and mental health need of the youth and the strain overall on the family unit. We really don't have a lot of those cases that have that abuse, neglect component, which is one reason why it's so difficult, I think, for the department to manage when those kids come into care, because what I think we're really good at the Department of Social Services is remedying abuse and neglect, and not raising children for years in foster care when another option could have been available.
We're going to hear about Roanoke City and what they're dealing with next. We want to talk about how we move forward from here and make this better for families so they don't have to do relief of custody. Gwen, Roanoke City is trying to do that. Talk to me about ways we can do this.
Well, one thing that the community can do is to come together. And so one thing that Roanoke City has done is that we have made the intention of working with our community partners, with Blue Ridge Behavioral Health Care, with our court services unit to support these families in a time of crisis. The Department of Social Services, we are mandated to address abuse and neglect. However, you know, Blue Ridge is the expertise when it comes to mental health. So if there's a young person suffering from mental health issues, we want to make sure that we are connecting the family to Blue Ridge, and not only just saying, take this piece of paper, call this person at Blue Ridge, but actually sit down and talk to the person at Blue Ridge, make sure they understand the department's role, and make sure the department understands Blue Ridge's role, so we can work together to coordinate services for the family.
Because when these families are in crisis, they hit one roadblock and it's like, nope. And it's hard to keep that up. So you have to have that coordinated effort.
Absolutely. When you're in crisis, when you're dealing with all those issues, the last thing they need is to hit a barrier. And once they hit that barrier, that's when families get to the point that they give up. And that's when they're more likely to say, I'm going to move forward with the relief of custody because I don't know what else to do. And so we want to make sure that we can intervene, come alongside the families, and help them navigate the system. Because it is a difficult system. And so we have seen some success in reaching out to our partners at Blue Ridge, coming together, staffing cases and developing our crossover staffings where we can sit down and we can talk about what's best for these families with these families.
Collaboration is a huge thing that you think we need to do more of. Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. A couple of months ago, the court services director, the Blue Ridge Children and Family Services director, and I decided that we were going to make sure that we were coordinating services for our families to avoid duplication of services, but to make sure that the child and the family received the services that they needed and that they was receiving those services from the agency that could best provide those services.
Thank you so much for being with us here today, and we'll be back right after this. Relief of custody cases are growing at an increasing rate in Virginia, truly to crisis level. 4 of the top 10 places seeing the most cases are here: Henry County, Roanoke City, Bedford, and Roanoke counties. If you missed our special last night, we talked about how Fairfax County is seeing success in preventing a lot of these cases.
If we can meet the need without having to enter foster care, already we're a step ahead.
It's always cheaper or more cost effective to come in and help a family at the beginning stages.
Most of the time, and the success stories, the hope has sprung from the family.
You can see how this prevention model works, and we talked to a social media influencer. His parents went through this process, putting him in foster care at 12 years old.
Ended up in front of the courts because they had no other alternatives. And I began a life in the juvenile system.
Both of those stories are streaming right now where you watch WSLS 10. A big thank you to our panel today for all the information they gave us about relief of custody and what it means for families, children, and us as a community. This is a growing issue across the country, and as we've talked about today, Virginia is trying to address it. We covered a lot. We have links to this information right now on WSLS.com.